Let's start with just a few of those words from our poem from William Wordsworth today. Just half a week after the wind sallied forth, from the peak of the crag it blew the giant away. What did these schoolboys? The very next day they went and they built another. They went and they built another. So one summer when I was in mid to late elementary school, I, along with a bunch of bored friends, who unlike in the poem were not all boys, my friends and I decided to engage in the time-honored tradition of building a hideout in the woods. Now first we tried building it out of bricks. We all knew about the 3 little pigs. But our tiny little arms grew tired of hauling all those bricks around the buckets down the path to the clearing that we had chosen. So we gave it up. So then we thought that we'd use sticks and straw. But we discovered that we lacked the technical know-how to make that work. So we settled for broken doors. Broken doors and wall sections from the abandoned barn nearby. And once we were done with our hideout, we would sit in it. It couldn't have been very secure as I look back, but we would sit in it and imagine new governments for our secret kingdom, where we would naturally be the rulers and we would tell stories until we were called home for dinner. And over the next few years, we would go back out to that clearing every spring after the winter snows had done their damage, and we would set the boards and the old doors back up. However, we didn't make the same structure each time. Instead, and maybe because we were just way too serious for our age, but instead we used the same boards and doors, but we would try to figure out what had gone wrong. What weaknesses had made it collapse? We would try to make it stronger, more stable. And no doubt in some way it was, even though we knew that the next winter would bring the same results, and we would have to put it back up again. And that is what I thought of when I read this poem for the first time. Not Wordsworth's story as written, but my story. After all, building and rebuilding is a universal experience. From the very beginning of life, we are called toward acts of building, acts of creativity, way before we know what we're doing. And way before we know what we're doing, we make things. Or at least we try to. Our childhood hideout probably appeared to be, to an adult or even another child observer, to be a pile of garbage. But we made it anyway. And we crawled in and out, and we had a great time. And there are good reasons to create. We make things for the joy of making them. We make things in order to learn how to make things. We create things to make sense of the world. And we also make things to show who we are, to tell other people that we exist and that we have learned. Also, we do it to help others on their way, like the Inuksuk in the cover of your order of service, a name that actually means that which acts in the capacity of a human. That which acts in the capacity of a human, guiding travelers in places where these stone cairns may be the only evidence that there are other human beings around. But we also know that these human constructs that we make are not permanent. They need our constant attention and help. Even piles of rock will lose their form over time. In Wordsworth's poem, the wind from the peak of the crag blows the giant away. And as the children head back up that hill to build a new one, as they go back up that hill, we realize, we the observers realize that the challenge isn't really in the first construction at all, but in what comes next after it is crushed by the snow or blown away by the wind. When we have built something and it collapses, or it vanishes, or it just doesn't work anymore, we have a choice. We have a choice. We can abandon that structure. We can try to restore it to be as close to what it once was, or we can make something like it, maybe on its face even a faithful copy, but which is in fact something different, something stronger, something better than before. For just as the environment has changed and brought about this destruction, or apparent destruction, the builder has changed as well. Now, of course, this is true for physical buildings, but it is just as true for ideas, for the systems of belief that we construct. And we have all had the experience of holding on to an idea or a belief for too long. Sometimes that idea is social or political. Sometimes it's about a relationship we are having or that we have had that needs to be different somehow. Ideas about who or what we love, what we are good or bad at. Ideas about the world and our place in it and other people's place in it. Or maybe just about what we value, our core convictions, about the ordering of the world and the nature of whatever is bigger than ourselves. We have held on to beliefs for too long. And when they fail us, when they collapse, there must be a rebuilding and a reformation. Now, 502 years ago, on the day that we mostly now call Halloween, Martin Luther may have nailed those 95 Theses to the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg, or he may not. But we do know that he mailed a letter on that day to his superiors that contained those theses. Out of love for truth and from desire to elucidate it, that letter began, the Reverend Father Martin Luther, Master of Arts and Sacred Theology and ordinary lecturer therein at Wittenberg, intends to defend the following statements and dispute them in that place. Now, the 95 Theses were pretty much contextual, burning issues for his time and not ours, which is why we didn't try to make them a reading. And they weren't so much the beginning of the Reformation either, so much as the public recognition of what the reformers saw going on around them. The old order, the old way of things had broken down in church and in government, facilitated by technologies such as the printing press that brought people closer together than ever before. A new worldview with a new set of rules and interests was rising up, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. And original ideas, new institutions were needed to make sense of the collapsing structures around them in order to rebuild, to reform, and to begin again. Martin Luther had a saying that a religion that gives nothing, costs nothing, and suffers nothing is worth nothing. A religion that gives nothing, costs nothing, and suffers nothing is worth nothing. He and his fellow reformers found themselves in a world where the dominant faith had atrophied and was no longer concerned with challenging and nurturing people on a path toward enlightenment, but was mostly interested in its own self-perpetuation, its own self-preservation, claiming to be able to reserve spots in heaven for big donors. There are days, no doubt, that the Finance Committee wishes that we could claim that down. Something had to change. And that spirit of reform swept through the Christian world, even affecting the Roman Catholic Church itself, as people searched through the ruins for the good and the bad of past belief to start again. Now, even farther back, the Apostle Paul in our reading today, speaking out of the ferment of the first century of the Common Era, talks a bit about what it means to start again. When I was a child, he says, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. And when I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly. In a mirror dimly. But then we will see face to face. This is Paul's way of pointing out what may seem obvious, but in the world of ideas, even more so than in buildings, it is something that we choose to forget or ignore sometimes. As we grow older, as we learn and mature, both as individuals and as a society, we must put away the things that no longer work for us, because we realize, or we should realize, that what we see as the capital T truth is a dim reflection of ourselves. We are bound to make mistakes. And we need to have the faith and the flexibility to forgive and adapt and repair, rather than to dig in to the belief that the world is always the way it is, always will be that, and never will change or be something else. When my friends and I grew up and left home, for example, it made sense that we wouldn't keep running back to a town where none of us live anymore to ensure that our clubhouse still stood. Now, when we needed to, we did do that. And we made it better each time, adapting to what our experience told us. And then we had to let it go. For it would have never been a house for us to weather the storms that life brings. Right now in the world, we see a tendency to dig in and stay in place when we should move on. Sometimes we find ourselves asking our leaders, political or otherwise, to appear decisive, to speak plainly and forcefully on complex issues. And the more that these leaders are able to do this for us, the more many people like them. Society does not allow them to have second thoughts, does not allow them to have questions, because frequently we humans are not comfortable with the second thoughts or questions that we find within ourselves. But there is another way. And the lesson of the Reformation reminds us of that. What if we decided to be excited by the journey into the unknown rather than afraid of it? What if we embraced the mystery, the ambiguity, when the mystery and the ambiguity are what call loudest to us, letting go of the old standby that we cling to with certainty? When we stand before the crushed remains of what we built or what we thought of as true, it makes greater sense to make something new out of its component parts than to pretend that it is still there. Or, if we choose to make it exactly the same again, to pretend that it will stand on its own. Congregationalist minister and abolitionist Henry Ward Beecher had that reforming approach in our reading from him today. There are many points, he said, in which the theology of the past did well enough for the past, but does not any more answer the reasonable questions and moral considerations that are brought to bear upon it in our day. In our day. Now today, over a century, almost a century and a half from Beecher's time, our day is a day for being open to new discoveries. Understanding that our structures, both public and personal, may be revolutionized, and a day for seeing the potential of the future rather than the attractions of the past. As we climb back up to the top of the crag, as we grow and change, continuing to become more human and more ourselves.